Alright, so hey everyone, today I want to take a look at Warhammer 40k Botgun and its Deadzones. This is on the Xbox Series X with the standard controller, just in case that varies on different platforms. So jumping into it, the camera uses about a 20% square deadzone, and because it's square, the deadzone is a little larger in the diagonals. There's angular restriction around the axes, so if your stick is within these blue regions, you'll be moving in a perfect cardinal direction. So in this case, it's moving perfectly left, and it's mostly straight, but right around the dead zone, there are these sort of clover-shaped regions. So as you can see here, if I move the stick at a very obvious angle, but still within this blue region, I'm still moving perfectly left. It isn't until you break out into these green regions where you start seeing diagonal movement occur. This is much more obvious when capping the view like this and looking for the horizontal movement, which would be diagonal movement if it wasn't capped. The acceleration jump within this axial restriction is perfectly straight. And in this diagonal region, makes something of a triangular shape. I'll cover the dotted and dashed lines in just a little bit, but movement is very similar. It's still square. And the axial restriction is very similar, but slightly less than the camera for most of it, but it keeps the same bulb shape to sort of demonstrate it. I'm going to use this as a reference point. And you can see I'm within this region, and I'm keeping perfectly aligned with the edge of this wall. But if I move into the green region, you can see diagonal movements beginning to occur. There are options to control these things, so the movement dead zone is controlled here. And we actually have a really cool graph of what these options are supposed to do, but as you can have just seen, the visual is completely inaccurate to what the dead zone shapes are. But let's just increase these and change the graph. So the maximum size is about 27%. The option says 25%, but we'll see that there's appears to be an underlying 2% axial dead zone inflating it. The restriction no longer has a clover shape. It seems to be perfectly straight, like we expect the axial dead zones to normally be. But we can see the diagonal movement occur much more abruptly than before. And this seems likely that this axial dead zone implementation is not rescaling the values properly, so it's actually just digging into angular values as well as acceleration values, and I'll show that in a little bit. And this is further evidenced by the acceleration jump. You can see within this region, it's perfectly straight. But when you move into the diagonal region, you see that there's a very significant offset. Movement is almost identical, just larger. The angular restriction, at least the straight parts of it, are exactly the same because there's not an option to control that. But the restriction has increased. The clover portion of it has increased with the dead zone size. And as a demonstration of that, we'll try to line up relatively to this wall and do the same thing. See that it's within this region, perfectly aligned, and then once I break out of this, it starts deviating. So at the minimum deadzone size, it seems like there's about a 2% axial deadzone remaining. It's a little difficult to demonstrate a deadzone of this size. And same with the axial restriction. It's a little easier when capping the view like this. You just have a very slight amount of restriction at this point. And this is the same with the movement deadzone. The acceleration jump, we can see that's still perfectly straight within this restricted region, and still a triangular shape within the diagonal region. But without the axial dead zones, you can see that it does not appear to be cropped, and seems nicely connected. The dotted and dashed lines are because there is an option for the acceleration zone size, and at its maximum value this applies to the dotted lines, so this just has the acceleration trigger earlier. And the interesting thing is at 0, this matches the dotted lines, not too different from the default value. But within this axial restriction range, you actually can't trigger acceleration at this value. And this is likely just a simple implementation of the acceleration only triggering when the stick is beyond this range at 100, but since it can't be larger than 100 when capped within this range like this, it just never triggers. I'm going to reduce this to, or raise this to 1, just so it does trigger. And for the acceleration curve with this value, this is linear and increases that way up until 99, and then at 100 it increases about 5 times to its maximum. And if you have the acceleration zone changed, this isn't an outer dead zone option. It just changes where the acceleration jump occurs, so it's the same linear curve, just where the acceleration jump occurs. Now, as you can see, the shapes of the dead zone do not match up with what's shown in game, and really what's shown in this image is much of what I'll be requesting. So I showed that the inner radial dead zone was square, and the acceleration thresholds are not perfectly circular, and that creates some issues with the inner dead zone. This requires you to move diagonally further than you would with the circular dead zone. And with this acceleration jump, the acceleration curve that I've tested only applies perfectly horizontally. As you can see, diagonally, the acceleration, well, horizontally, the acceleration is triggering at 100, but diagonally, it's much sooner than that. And what's more than that, as you push further, you see it trigger, and if you push further, it'll stop. So the acceleration actually isn't at the end of the stick magnitude, but actually at some point in the later portions of it. So this can feel very inconsistent if you're making movements within the regions. You can notice that, say from here to here. As you can see, if I move further than this, I wouldn't notice it, but if I'm noticing it, or if I'm doing it here, you will notice that. So having it match the shape would avoid that happening. Additionally, there's no acceleration vertically, and it would be good to see that apply vertically just so that it's consistent, so that you can make fast movements horizontally as well as vertically. And the way this seems to be applied, this increase in acceleration only seems to occur on the horizontal axis, and this can have a side effect of skewing diagonal movement horizontally. Whereas if you apply this acceleration evenly to both the horizontal and vertical axes, it'll maintain your diagonal movement. So change both the acceleration zone and radial dead zones to be perfectly circular, and the acceleration zones to apply vertically as well. For the axial dead zones, this axial restriction does work, but I'll demonstrate the other problem with I was talking about before. So we saw it restrict diagonal movement. I don't have a graph to demonstrate this, but we saw the very abrupt diagonal change, so this was cropping off your diagonal movement. But we were playing at 0 inner radial dead zone, and even with this 2% dead zone, we don't see movement with this axial dead zone applied, because there's just an axial dead zone being laid on top of this. And if I move to break out of this axial dead zone 25, you can see that the minimum speed is very fast, and this is just cropping off the dead zone. It's not rescaling it at all. So you're actually losing both angles and your minimum movement speeds. Your minimum movement speeds wouldn't be affected if your look radial dead zone is above the axial dead zone. Diagonal acceleration might be a little funky, but it shouldn't apply this way. This should only apply to the angle and be rescaled properly so you don't lose any angles. I would like this axial implementation does work, but I would recommend an angular version over it. And the reason for that is this implementation, if it's larger than the center dead zone or radial dead zone, all your smallest movements will only have access to 4 directions, whereas with an angular implementation, diagonal movement will still always be accessible. Now, another thing is you can see the acceleration zone speed increase. This actually doesn't change the increase in speed you get with your acceleration. It changes how fast it is. This is the equivalent of ramp up time in Apex or other games. So you can see at the lowest value, you can see how there's some build up time before it maxes out. And if I put this option 1000, you can see that it caps out pretty much immediately. Now, something I'll talk about before I get to that is the look sensitivity is quite slow, and the issue with that is you can see this is the accelerated speed, but without it, this is your maximum turn speed. And this style of implementation is pretty normal in games. There's an attempt to keep the general sensitivity very low to increase precision, but have the acceleration maximum very high so you can still turn fast. But one of the things this does is, if you're, say, circle strafing an enemy, this sensitivity is kind of just on the border of what you can feasibly manage. And if you're saying wanting to jump over an enemy or do something like that, you simply don't have the turn speed to do that. So an increase to the sensitivity would be requested, and ideally this increase would be many times to be able to match the accelerated sensitivity. You should be able to have this turn speed without needing the acceleration. So since this acceleration jump is about 5 times, it'd be nice to see this look sensitivity increased by about 5 times to be able to do that. Additionally, since we don't have an option for the actual speed increase for the acceleration or the multiplier, it'd be nice to get one so that we can control that. So the current increase is about 5 times, and giving us a slider to move it down to 1 would allow us to disable it, and of course with a slider players would be able to pick any value in between. Another option I'd like to request is one for the acceleration curve. So again, the way this and other games have done this is use a linear curve with very low sensitivity with some acceleration jump to be able to turn fast. The benefits of having an exponential curve is that you can play at a high sensitivity and still have easy access to very slow turn speeds. And the benefit of using an exponential curve over an acceleration jump like this is you don't have direct control over your speed. So you have control over this speed, but once it begins accelerating, the increase is automatic. You don't have control until it caps. Whereas if you're using just the curve itself and one that you are able to customize, you have direct control over those values. So if you're playing with a higher sensitivity curve, with a curve of your preference so that you can make precise adjustments easily, you could make these tracking movements faster and just as accurately with that. So it'd be good to see that implemented. Now for the acceleration implementation itself, you can see that I'm making circles right now, and this seems fine. There doesn't seem to be anything wrong with this. But when implementing a curve, implementing it by magnitude or by axis, and specifically by axis, has some significant issues. And it with linear curve doesn't matter, so it's not clear what's being used here. But if a curve slider was added, it'd be important for it to be set up by magnitude. If it was done by axis, this has significant effects on your diagonal movement as well as your diagonal sensitivity if it's capped normally. So that would be important to be able to offer that option and have it work effectively. So it's really cool to see all these options added. It's just a shame that we have a really cool diagram like this and it's just completely wrong to what's actually being applied. But we have a lot of the stuff, it's just some of the implementations need to be tweaked. And as a summary, again, change the inner radial dead zone and acceleration zones to be completely circular. The acceleration zones should apply vertically as well and accelerate both the horizontal and vertical axes. The axial dead zones, I'd recommend using an angular implementation over an axial one, but this is fine. Just make it only apply to the angle and scale properly so you don't lose any angles. Increase the look sensitivity by about 5 times so that players can turn fast without needing to rely on the acceleration. Add an option for the acceleration zone speed multiplier from a range of the default 5 times down to 1 time, so you can completely disable it or customize in between. and an option for the acceleration curve with a range of linear, which is this default, up to, say, a cubic curve, a 3.0 with 0.1 increments. That would give players a ton of control over it. So that about covers it. Thanks for watching. This game just released, so hopefully we have a bit of time to see this be updated in the future. So yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching.